Okay, Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. So today's is going to be a very simple introductory lecture to cereals and legumes. For an introduction, uh, cereals are the member of the grass family. Okay, for example, rice, wheat, and so on. They all possess the characteristic of the grass. They are grown for their seeds, okay, which we harvested and we mill, and then usually we turn them into flour, and sometimes we can eat them directly in the form of rice, okay, which are high in carbohydrates, protein, minerals, and vitamins. The water content of the grains is low compared to other vegetable. Okay, of course, other vegetable they contains lots of water, and therefore they are usually heavier and they can go bad very easily compared to the grains. That's why they are easy to store, because it can prevent the microbial growth, okay, and it is also easy to transport because there is not a lot of wet bulk, which contributes to the weight of the transportation. There is also a suitable cereal for each type of climate. Okay, for example, wheat is easily grown in certain area of the world. Rice is better grown in certain part of the tropical climate, and so on. So there are several types of cereal grain. The first one is refined after undergoing the processing processes. Second one, usually wheat. Okay, it can be whole grain, bulgur, farina, different name of the wheat. The third one, the one of the most popular ones in South in the world, I think, rice. Okay, it can be long grain, it can be medium and short grain, brown rice. Okay, if you undergo half of the processes. uh, white rice, okay, white rice, I'm not really sure what is it. Okay, aromatic rice, okay, usually comes from Thailand. Jasmine and basmati. Basmati usually have lower starch content, so therefore when you cook them they are easily separated compared to the other kind of rice. Okay, other type of grain is corn, okay, which is usually very popular in USA. Okay, and then barley, one of the major substrate for the fermentation. And the last one is oats. Okay, usually we eat this one for the breakfast. Okay, so this is the basic structure and composition of the grains. Okay, the first one is husk, the rough outer covering, okay, of the grain. Okay, this one husk, and then bran, the hard outer covering under the husk. Okay, bran is directly under the husk. Okay, it forms a protective layer of hyaluron. Okay, and usually it is essential for the plant to protect the endosperm of the plant, right? The endosperm is the majority of the grain that contains the starch. Okay, so usually under the processing method, we try to remove all of the components of the grain except for endosperm, whereby it contains most of the carbohydrate. Okay, bran and also germ. Germ is whereby the plant can grow from it. It is the embryo of the plant, okay? And it is the smallest portion of grain. So we try to remove everything except for endosperm. So actually we are removing most of the nutrient dense components of the plant, and then leaving the white part of the endosperm, which contains lots of carbohydrate. Okay, so it's not very healthy compared to the whole grain. Okay, so the outer layer is husk, contains 15% of the kernel, the overall structure of the grain, and it is high in cellulose fiber, B vitamins, and iron. The large central portion, okay, bran and endosperm, okay, contain most of the starch and protein. So usually we keep the endosperm for the consumption. And the last one is the germs, the small structure which is rich in fat, protein, and vitamins and minerals. Okay, this is the embryo for the future plant. Yeah, so we try to we are removing the germ from the product. One is to avoid from them to be sprouting, and the second one because it is rich in fat, so it can easily go bad. Okay, can easily go rancid if we keep them under the storage. Okay, so this is the bran layer. Okay, so there are several thin layer. It is a several thin layers that protects the endosperm. Okay, and it contains lots of protein, lipid, minerals, vitamin, phenolic compounds, and cellulose. So bran is actually a very rich components of the plant, but we are removing them because we want to get the white appearance of the product, okay, for example the flour, and secondly we want to get a finer texture, okay? So if we have the bran together in the final product, the texture is usually rougher, the same as when you eat the bread. The whole grain bread tastes a little bit coarse compared to the white bread. Okay, the starchy endosperm, okay, starchy, lots of carbohydrate, contains 83% of the kernel. It is non-viable but may have enzymatic activity, means that it is usually uh, don't have any biological properties that is happening inside the plant. Okay, usually it is just used by the plant as the source of the energy. It contains high levels of starch, okay, 75% of wheat and sperm, and it is a source of fermentable sugars, okay, because it is starch, contains lots of sugars. Contains extensible gluten protein, okay, one of the major protein in the plant-based product is gluten, and some people can get sensitive to gluten. That's why they try to remove the gluten from the plant-based product, okay, for example bread and so on. It contains very little mineral, fiber, fat, and vitamin. Okay, but contain lots of energy in the form of carbohydrate. Okay, and last one is germs. 2 to 2% of the kernel. It is a viable tissue, always growing. There is always something going on, biological processes. It contains embryo. Okay, all rudimentary growth tissues. It is responsible for germination, for example, during the molting of barley. It contains high quantities of lipid than other fats. Okay, that's why it can go bad because of the rancidity. So for the cereals processing, there are three major strategies being employed now. Probably because the strategy now is quite old, there are more probably research strategies. Okay, the first one is the primary processing, whereby you are converting them into something primary, for example, flour, rice, and so on. Secondary processing is when you add another processing on top of the primary processing. For example, when you try to ferment them, okay, or you add something nutrient, okay, or baking, okay, means that you're baking the flour. Okay, flour is a primary processing, but baking is the secondary one. And the last one is novel processing. Okay, you add something to enrich the primary products. Okay, for example, the functional foods. Okay, you add prebiotics, you add probiotics, you add more vitamins. Okay, you enrich them with fiber. Okay, because you already removed them in the processing. Okay. So this is a novel method. Usually, us as a research student, we try to tackle the novel processing method. Okay, in order to improve the product. Okay, I already told you about this one. You can read it yourself. Primary. Okay, this one is the novel, the third one. So what happens is grain can undergo certain bioprocessing method, okay, to produce other components, for example glucose, because they are actually rich in starch. So we are converting them into glucose with the help of microorganism, for example single fungal fermentation. And after the first stage of fermentation, you can undergo the second fermentation to utilize the products that has been produced by the first microorganism. And finally, you get the products that you want. Probably something that is very valuable. Okay? For example, during my PhD project, I was trying to produce the cholesterol reducing metabolites from the fungus using the glucose that is extracted from the biomass waste of the plant. Okay, so there is something novel processing. Yeah? So this is the mind map, if you want to call it. Okay, from the grain, you can separate them into three major components. The first one is bran, okay, and then you can use as feed for the animals or solid state fermentation because they don't really have water. So you can use them as a solid substrate for the growth of the microorganism. Second, flour, and then the third one is germ. Okay, because germ is rich in oil, so you can use them as oil, or you can add for the in the food because they are rich in the nutrients. Okay, for the flour, usually you can divide them into two components. The major ones are starch, okay, and the lesser one is protein. For the starch, you can convert them to sugar first, glucose, because starch is a combination of many glucose by using enzymes or fermentation. And then this glucose can be used in media for the second fermentation to produce protein. The same for the protein, you can use enzymes or fermentation to convert the protein into usable amino acid or peptides. Okay? The thing about the protein is if you cut the protein at different site, it can produce different kind of amino acid or bioactive peptides. So you can try and error. Okay? By cutting at different sites of the protein, you probably produce something that is more beneficial than what you intend for. Okay, so many of the research students, they are actually using different proteases. Okay. That's why, because it is 5.1%, right? It can be because the microorganism will ferment this fiber at 1%, right? And produce milk gas. Okay, nutritional content all the same, except for soy and peanuts, fish. Okay, less carbohydrate and more fat. I almost finished my 15 minutes application. So soy is complete protein with the amino acid required for you can just logic that means that it only cause the blood sugar to spike a little bit, so you don't your body is healthy. You can just logic.